From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
The race to be Rhode Island's next Attorney General is heating up and wide open. 3 candidates have entered the Democratic primary so far, with another waiting in the wings. What would they continue, and what would they change compared with outgoing incumbent Peter Nerona? This week on the first half of Newsmakers, we'll find out from one of them, State Representative and candidate for AG, Jason Knight. Then,
he's been elected longer than I've been alive.
Massachusetts Congressman Seth Moulton wants to do what Joe Kennedy couldn't in 2020, unseat incumbent U.S. Senator Ed Markey in the primary. On the second half of this week's Newsmakers, Moulton's pitch to southeastern Massachusetts. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. I'm alongside 12 News politics editor Ted Nesi, and our guest this week is Democratic candidate for Attorney General, State Representative Jason Knight.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Good to have you. 60 seconds or less, Rep. Why do you want to be the next Attorney General of Rhode Island?
Well, listen, the Attorney General's office is super important. Of course, it handles all prosecutions of felony and violent crime in the state of Rhode Island, and that's always been the case. It's the people's lawyer, and it has this extra duty of fighting back against the unlawful policies coming down from Washington. So I'm really interested in making sure that whoever fills that role is a good candidate with a broad and deep set of experiences. That's me. I believe I'm the best candidate for the job, and the reason why is I've had public service. I started my public service just out of high school when I joined the Navy in the submarine force as a nuclear power operator. As a prosecutor, after law school, I became a prosecutor with the AG's office, so I've actually been there standing up for victims' rights. I've been a criminal defense lawyer, so I know what it's like to be on the other side, standing up for the rights of the accused. And those experiences combined give me a deep well of experience in the business that the AG does every day. Additionally, as a state rep for Barrington and Warren for the last 9 or 10 years, well, 5 terms, I've delivered on my promises. I have passed laws protecting public safety. I was part of and proud to be part of the advocacy push.
Well, let's dive into the AG stuff. You hit me at, I'm holding you to 60 seconds, Rep. All right, so look, as you pointed out, you were a prosecutor early on in your career. Then you went and opened a successful law practice, and you specialize in criminal defense. I was taking a look this morning. Right now in federal court, you're representing an accused fentanyl trafficker, defendants accused in wire fraud and money laundering, a defendant in a murder for hire case. State court, you have a lot of clients too: domestic violence, drunk driving, drug dealing. Look, it is a person's constitutional right to be represented in a criminal case, but you are not a public defender, and in large part, you get to choose the clients that you represent. How would you square that for people when you're asking them to now be the state's top prosecutor?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, when I go to court in a defense lawyer role, I represent people's rights under the Constitution, right, of the United States of America, where people have, the accused has the right to any number of trial rights, including effective counsel. It is basically, you're in the business of calling out the government if and when the government makes mistakes or violates people's rights. Because you can have all the rights you want, but if there's no way to effectuate them in court, they're worthless, right? So that's what defense lawyers do. Now, ironically, at this time in our history here in Rhode Island, the Attorney General is engaged in the very same process of pushing back against a Trump administration that is acting unlawfully towards Rhode Island, standing up for people's rights in court to give voice to those rights. So I don't see any disconnect between being a good lawyer for your client, whether it's the people of Rhode Island or somebody accused of a crime. And I will say this, I'm not a public defender, but I do take court-appointed cases because that's what lawyers are supposed to do when we engage in this work.
Let's keep talking about the violent crime questions. This week I interviewed former Fall River Mayor Will Flanagan, who was brutally stabbed last month in broad daylight, allegedly by a man with a lengthy history of mental illness as well as a criminal record. I want to play some of what he had to say, his message to policymakers about that attack. Let's take a listen.
My attacker should not have been on the streets on October 20th. Given his long history of mental illness, given his long history of violence, given his long history of entries into the criminal justice system, he should have been either in jail, in prison, or in a mental institution. We need to reopen the mental institutions and to make sure people like my attacker are in these institutions, being medicated, being treated, and off the streets.
Do you agree?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank God that Mayor Flanagan survived, and I'm really saddened by what happened on the streets of Fall River to him. I agree with him that if somebody has a long record and a record of violent crime, that the place they should be is not on the street. Wherever that is, they should be in a place where they're not able to reach out and hurt people. I mean, that is the business of the Attorney General in the state of Rhode Island. When you prosecute serious violent crime, you're doing it for the protection of the people. And it's sad to say, but sometimes it is absolutely true that there are people out there who are not safe to be in public. And it is the AG's job to make sure that they go through the cases appropriately, looking out for public safety so that when there is a person who is violent and dangerous like that, they are not on the streets.
Let's talk about the Washington Bridge, Rep. If you are the state's next Attorney General, you will inherit the state's lawsuit against contractors and the whole Washington Bridge crisis. Your constituents on the East Bay have felt that crisis more than most.
Say it twice. That is for real.
Okay, so then what have you done for them? What have you done for your constituents as a lawmaker to seek accountability, to hold feet to the fire with the Washington Bridge crisis in your role as lawmaker?
In the State House and out of the State House, whenever I've had an opportunity to talk about this problem that we've had, this failure of government, this fiasco at DOT, when I've had the opportunity to talk about it and push for changes on it, I've pushed for full transparency and accountability. I want to know what happened. I want to know why there was this failure of government. I mean, thank goodness no one was hurt, that the bridge didn't fall down, but it was just this close. That is entirely unacceptable, and I'll do it here again today. I call on the governor to open up the books, to tell us why DOT failed, and to extract accountability out of DOT where it is necessary, and to restructure the agency so it never happens again.
Restructure the agency, to be clear, do you think RIDOT Director Peter Alviti, there needs to be a change there?
You know, the last time I was asked this question was before the forensic audit was out, and
that was leaked, by the way.
Yeah, I saw that. It was before the forensic audit was out, and my answer was, I don't want to see political firings just for the sake of political firings, right? A head roll just to make the public happy. But if you mess up, fess up, right? And it appears from the audit that the agency under Alviti's time there failed, and we came this close with the bridge, so I do think he's got to go.
You mentioned earlier the current Attorney General Norona's aggressive litigation strategy against the Trump administration. There's been a lot of talk about whether the country's in a constitutional crisis, and I posed this to one of your opponents as well. Justice Amy Coney Barrett recently said when asked about that, quote, "We would clearly be in one if the rule of law crumbles, but that is not the place we are." Do you agree or disagree?
I think that the Trump administration walks the line every single day. They ignore court orders from lower courts. They push and push and push. They certainly ignore Congress, and that is awful. But our system is set up as a three-way tug of war. I'm really saddened that Congress isn't doing their job to pull back on their end of the rope these days. But so far, the Trump administration has obeyed the Supreme Court when the Supreme Court chooses to speak. So I think we are just this close. But it appears that they are following the Supreme Court orders when they come down. A lot of those Supreme Court orders I'm not happy with, but I haven't seen them out and out disobey a Supreme Court order yet.
And would you say for voters you're generally aligned with how Norona has approached litigation against the Trump administration?
Say that again.
Are you in line with Peter Norona? Do you agree with the way he has handled this litigation strategy?
Yes, because listen, the AG's job is to protect Rhode Islanders from bad actors and criminals. And when, it's up to 40 lawsuits now. I was just reading before I came on today. It could be 1,000 lawsuits. When the Trump administration acts unlawfully towards Rhode Island, it is the Attorney General's job to get in there into the courthouse and stand up for Rhode Islanders and push back. And I would continue that work.
We got about a minute left here, Rep. Is there any issue, you answered Ted's question there on the lawsuits against the Trump administration, but are there any issues where you differ from Attorney General Peter Norona, or where you think the office could be improved?
I do think that, I appreciate Peter Norona's service to Rhode Island. I appreciate the effort that he has put in to improve the Public Protection Bureau on the civil side, and certainly I would engage that work. I do think that the criminal side needs a little TLC. It's really important work. Those prosecutors and staff need to be supported as they do, as they handle cases that frankly contain a lot of ugly stuff. And so I think that, refocusing on the criminal division to make sure it's doing its job to the highest levels is important.
State Rep Jason Knight, we're out of time. I apologize, but he's Democratic candidate for Attorney General. Thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me. I'll get the answer to the question next time.
Okay, sounds good. When we come back, Massachusetts Congressman Seth Moulton talks to Ted Nesi on why he's taking on Senator Ed Markey. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Massachusetts Congressman Seth Moulton wants to be a U.S. Senator, but he has to defeat fellow Democrat Ed Markey in the primary to do it. Ted Nesi sat down with Moulton for an interview in southeastern Massachusetts to hear his pitch to voters.
Congressman, thanks for taking a few minutes to sit down with me while you're making this campaign swing to the South Coast.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So, start with the basics. Why are you challenging Senator Markey?
We can't afford to wait 6 more years for new leadership. The status quo, the old playbook, has gotten us a second term of Donald Trump, and a lot of Americans are hurting. A lot of people across Massachusetts are hurting. You know, I first ran for Congress because I had seen the consequences of failed leadership in Washington while serving in Iraq as a Marine. And now, as someone who's never been afraid to challenge the status quo, even in my own party, I'm running for Senate because we need a new generation of leadership in the United States Congress.
So, age is a big part of the conversation so far, and it was even before you got into the race. You know, if Senator Markey was 70, would you be doing this?
Look, I have a lot of respect for Senator Markey, and he's served the country for a long time, but he has been in office for half a century, and I think one of the problems with Democrats today is people look at us and say, where's the future? You know, how are you going to take us forward? We all know you're opposed to Donald Trump, and honestly, I think we should be fighting Trump even harder than we are. But we've also got to have a plan for the future. We've got to have a vision. And this race is about investing in the future or maintaining the status quo. That's the choice before Massachusetts voters.
I've been thinking a lot about the age question because it's coming up more and more. We saw what happened with President Biden. We have a lot of septuagenarians in office in this region. I've covered Senator Markey for a while. He seems pretty fit and energetic. He doesn't seem like Joe Biden did last year. I mean, is there a distinction there between the number on the birthday card and how they look out and about?
Joe Biden looked just like that when he was elected the last time. I think we should learn the lessons of Joe Biden, Dianne Feinstein, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But it's not just about one more term. It's about investing in the future for our party. I have a lot of respect for Senator Markey. He's a genuinely nice man, but he's been elected longer than I've been alive. And I think it's time for a new generation of leadership in our politics.
Let's talk a little bit about policies. I know you've said publicly you agree on Senator Markey, with Senator Markey on a lot of things. I want to ask you a couple things I know that are where Senator Markey, maybe you have difference. I'll find out. Markey's famously skeptical of nuclear energy. It's been a big issue for him for a long time. He was one of the only Senate Democrats who voted in committee against Senator Whitehouse's Advance Act on nuclear power plants. Where are you on that question of adding more nuclear as people are starting to have different ways of thinking about that?
We should have all carbon-free options on the table. And there are legitimate concerns that people have had in the past about the safety of nuclear energy, but next-generation nuclear technologies, not only next-generation fission, that make it impossible to have an accident like you saw at Fukushima, but also the real next generation, which is fusion technology. I mean, this will power the world someday, and if we're not investing in it here in Massachusetts, here in America, China is going to win that race. So at a time when people's electric bills are sky high, at a time when we're missing our climate goals, our carbon goals in Massachusetts, we ought to have this on the table. And increasingly, environmental groups, and especially young people, recognize that nuclear should be part of the mix.
Do you think Democrats, there's this big talk about abundance, I'm sure you're well aware of that right now. Do you think Democrats have gotten into a box where they're kind of afraid of innovation and new things and need to be more open-minded to that sort of thing?
Yes, we have to be investing. Electric bills are too high because we don't produce enough power. It's a simple supply and demand issue. Housing is unaffordable because we don't have enough housing. And we have terrible traffic in Massachusetts because we haven't invested in next generation rail. You got to make it faster than driving to get around Massachusetts. I have a plan to do that. It'll make it much faster than the old-fashioned commuter rail line they put in a few years ago to get to Boston.
What's your point about rail? And I know you've worked a lot on that issue. I mean, we do finally have South Coast Rail running down here. People are very excited about that. But if you talk to Mayor Mitchell in New Bedford, he calls it the scenic route because to make everybody happy along the way, they had to take this sort of roundabout route down New Bedford. It's a 90-minute train ride, and even that was hugely expensive. Lord knows if they'll ever do phase 2. Look, what lesson do you take from that?
We got to learn from international experience. There's no other country in the world that's building 1950s style commuter rail. We ought to be building 2025 style rail, which is all electric, fast, completely carbon free, and importantly, it's got to be faster than driving or not enough people are going to take it to actually make a difference in our traffic.
Also on policy, Senator Markey, I think of him as sort of an old school, very skeptical of the Pentagon and hard power on foreign affairs, on domestic. You obviously are a veteran, that's well known in your biography. How do you think about that? Where Democrats should be on national defense issues?
There's no one who's more skeptical of war than veterans who've had to put their lives on the line for the country. And that's why you see so often in Congress, it's the veterans who are asking the toughest questions about whether we should go to war, asking questions right now about what the president is doing with Venezuela. We all want to stop the scourge of fentanyl, but do we need to start a war with Venezuela just because Trump doesn't like the guy in power there? These are tough questions that we have to ask. And at the end of the day, a strong national security, a strong national defense prevents wars. That's what I'm all about. I ran for Congress the first time because I had seen the consequences of failed Washington leadership when it came to Iraq. We got into a war that a lot of people question whether we should ever have had happen, and Senator Markey voted for that war.
You have a bit of a reputation as, at times, a lone wolf. You unseated Congressman Tierney. You tried to unseat as leader Nancy Pelosi. You ran against, briefly, your own senior senator in the presidential race. I know that you weren't in that super long. Now you're running against Markey. I mean, what do you say to that sort of impression that you don't play well in the sandbox, I guess I would say?
Actually, I would say I'm just not afraid to challenge my own party when the status quo isn't working and we need change. And there's too many people in Washington who just go along to get along.
It's a very complex process to get on the ballot. I learned this last time in Massachusetts. You got to get the 5 million caucuses all need to vote for enough people. Then you got to get the convention. You got to get your 15%. Are you confident you can run that obstacle course with an incumbent who has a lot of institutional support and actually get through the convention process and be on the ballot next summer?
Well, yes, but look, he's probably going to try to stop us, and there's nothing that's more undemocratic than just keeping people off the ballot. And we've already heard that he's going to try to do that. I think we ought to have a much more open system in Massachusetts that doesn't require jumping through all these hoops just to give voters a choice in the primary.
Coming up, lessons learned from Congressman Joe Kennedy's failed run against Senator Markey. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Massachusetts Congressman Seth Moulton is taking on fellow Democrat Ed Markey in the primary for U.S. Senate. Ted Nesi sat down with Moulton about that decision and what he would do differently from Congressman Joe Kennedy's failed bid in 2020.
So let's talk about the last Senate race a little bit, what you took away from that. So Bristol County was a very important part of Joe Kennedy's base. He did very well down here, even as he lost statewide. What did you learn from Joe Kennedy's election, which didn't go the way he wanted, and how does Bristol County fit in? You're a Salem guy. We don't see you down here much because that's not your district.
Right.
How does Bristol County fit into your plan?
Well, you're going to see me down here a lot because I have a lot to learn about this part of the state, and I'll be the first to admit, I'm here to listen. I'm here to learn. I'm not here to tell people down here what they need. I want to listen to the people that I want to represent here, ultimately represent their wishes in Washington.
What are you hearing today?
Work for them.
What are you hearing today?
What I'm hearing, for example, is that there's a lot of economic opportunity here, but we're not capitalizing it on enough. And people are concerned about the transition to an AI world, losing the old jobs, the factory jobs that this part of the state has been so proud of for a long time, maybe going away. What's the next big thing? For example, I was talking earlier about shipbuilding and the fact that the Navy needs a lot of smaller autonomous ships. This is kind of like the perfect place to do it. The sub base is not far away. You've got extraordinary institutes like Woods Hole. You've got the various places down here that have been focused on the maritime economy. But you know what? I'm not going to tell them that's what they should do. I'm going to listen to see if that's what they're interested in. But that's one of the ideas that I've already heard in my time down here this morning.
Have you talked to Joe Kennedy about what happened last
Yes, I've talked to him. We've tried very hard to learn lessons from him, his experience. But understand, like, this is a different time, and I think that people are actually looking for someone who's willing to take on the status quo when it's not working, and that's something I've always been willing to do in my time in Congress.
So you, one thing we learned from 2020, Ed Markey has a deep hold on the left side of the party and among progressives. He's done very well with that. And you've said, as we talked about earlier, that you agree on a lot of issues with Ed Markey. So to what extent are you going to pitch yourself more to moderate Democrats in Massachusetts? To what extent are you going to fight for those progressive votes, or are they sort of already locked up for him? I mean, you know, there's all this talk about which Democrat is in which faction of the party right now. Who are you aiming for here?
That was a very 2020 framing. And this is a time when Democrats need to come together. This is not a race about moderate versus progressive. Senator Markey and I share the same progressive values. This is a race about the status quo, the old generation, or investing in the next generation of leaders in our party.
As we wrap up here, and you've spoken to some of this already, so perhaps it's a little repetitive, but you know, we look around, the Democratic Party brand is in very bad shape. President Trump is underwater in the polls, yet still looks fairly strong. There's very little path to a Senate majority for Democrats right now. I mean, do you think it's entirely this generational issue, which is so core to what you're talking about here? Do you think there's a broader problem for Democrats?
I think that it's a good question. I think the generational issue is huge. I mean, we lost 3 Democrats in the House of Representatives just in the past 10 months to death. In fact, we would have stopped the big, beautiful bill the first time it came up for a vote if one of my colleagues, you know, God bless his soul, had just simply lived a day longer. So we've got a serious problem with generational change, with not allowing the new generation and a new generation of ideas to rise up in our party. I think people know that. But I also think that we lost some trust with American voters in the last election, because we said, you know what, there's no problem at the border. That's just something that the Republicans are making up. And people could see there was a problem. Now, we all hate the way Trump is handling immigration, but part of that is because we didn't have a good solution ourselves. We lost credibility when we said there wasn't much inflation. Remember, the Biden administration said, oh, it's just transitory. I'm not even sure what that means, right? And then we also lost a lot of credibility when people said, there's nothing to see here. The president is just fine. And of course, people could see with their own 2 eyes that was not the case. So I think that Democrats, we need to earn back the trust of American voters. And what I intend to do in this campaign is earn the trust of Massachusetts voters. I want to work for you. And that's the case that I'm making on the campaign trail.
That is all the time we have. This week on Eli Sherman's Behind the Story, legendary radio reporter Steve Klampkin talks to Eli and Kim Kalunian about his decades-long career in news. You can watch that on the free 12 Plus TV app. It also airs. Well, there it was on the screen, and now it's gone. Don't forget to listen to us on a podcast. If you missed any of it, you can watch it on WPRI.com. We'll see you next week.